Hey Texas Progressives, Josh Greene here with the Texas Progressive Caucus's Organizing Update number 1. It's the day after Thanksgiving. I hope you had a nice time with your family. I'm fortunate that my family is mostly Democrats and left-leaning people, so we had discussions about our concerns and what's going to happen next. But then there was also a lot of discussions about hope and what we're actually going to do. And so that's what I want to talk to you today about, is what is the general organizing idea and the outline for what the Texas Progressive Caucus is about and what we're going to be working on and how you can get involved and help. So let me go over some of the things that we're going to talk about today. First will be the work that we're doing inside the Texas Democratic Party. Then we're going to talk a little bit about improving communications across the state. How can we get our message out there? How can we spread the word? And how can we hold each other to mutually accountable work? Third is going to be talking about building a mass movement to respond not only to the crisis that we face today, but to push our ideas forward and actually turn them into policy by winning elections and getting our people, good progressive people, into government. Next, we're going to talk about renewable energy, infrastructure, and space as an economic development program for Texas. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the worst case scenarios, war and the rise of fascism in this country. So let's get to it. All right, working inside the Texas Democratic Party. Myself, Andre Traber, John Courage, and others who are interested in what we're doing are already in the SDEC. And we've had one meeting so far, and we've got another meeting coming up December 17th in Austin. And I want to invite you to that because it's going to have a lot of good feedback about the election coming from the state party. And we're going to announce our activities there. After the SDC meeting on December 17th, we're going to hold a founding meeting where we will adopt a document that contains the principles and strategies that we'll work off of. And then after that, it's going to be a long day. After that, we're going to go to the Alamo Draft House to see a screening of Star Wars Rogue One. That's not right. We're going to go see a screening of Star Wars. It's not Star Wars. What's it called? Rogue One, a Star Wars story. And we're going to get tips on fighting the Empire, and we're going to find those plans for the Death Star. So let's talk about some of the opportunities in the SDEC. From what I've seen so far and in discussions that I've had with experienced members of the party, the SDEC kind of looks like this. Or let's talk about the state party in general. What I've seen is that there's a lot of really dedicated folks who either are officers or staff of the state party, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting. They really know what they're doing, and they've got their act together. Then there's a group of real committed activists who are around them, maybe in the SDEC, maybe they're county chairs, maybe they've been around and done it all. They're carrying also a large share of the work. But I think something like a third or a half of the SDEC is new. And in the past, they've had trouble getting the SDEC to commit to work and follow through on programs. And that's where I think we can change things. And we're going to talk more about that in the future. One of the other things that we need to work on is having good sets of information. And so one of the first projects that I want to work on is putting together a list of all the SDEC members and county chairs with their contact info. That's pretty much done. But one of the other things we need to do is put together a list of every local chapter and organization that's inside the Democratic Party. We need to know who's in charge. We need to know how to reach them, because we need to be sending our messages to them at their monthly meetings so that they're hearing a progressive voice in the state. Okay, let's talk about communications across the state. One of the successes that we had with the Bernie Statewide Organizing Committee and getting ready for the Texas State Convention were the conference calls that we held. It took a lot of work on our part because we had to, reach out and find the information that was difficult to find, the answers to questions that people would have. But then we also had to build in our organizing strategy and, what were we actually going to do at the convention? How were we going to create that win that you saw? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for conference call organizing, and eventually that can turn into video conferencing, which I think is even more useful. But we can start with the conference call organizing. Let's take Bexar County, for example, right? So San Antonio's in Bexar County, but we have all these counties surrounding us, and then especially going up towards Austin, where there's large populations and people that need help organizing. So why not start these regional conference calls, the San Antonio area, the Houston area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Start these calls where county chairs are connecting with each other. They're sharing successes, they're asking for help and opinions, they're giving advice. And with today's technology, we can put that on the internet so that activists in the area can watch and know what's going on. And people outside the area can get a glimpse of, how do you do it well? So I mentioned working together online. I'm a big fan of the Google Docs and spreadsheets and tools and all that. We use that with a lot of success, again, at the state convention. And I think that we can start to build that into working together to shrink the size of the state. Let me give you an example. The SDC is reorganizing its committee structures, and there's the base voter committee now. And under that committee, there are different groups, right? Interest groups. So education, disabled, the African American, the Hispanic, the veterans. Each one of those groups contains people from all over the state, right? And it's unrealistic to expect them to come together and do the work physically in person. So I think we need to start working together online so that we can get these different groups to build out their campaign plans. How are they going to target their specific groups, and what messages are they going to send them? We can do all that from the comfort of our home and save a lot of travel time and, push the work forward faster than it would if we were waiting to meet in person. And the last part of the communicating across the state is having mutually accountable work. And so I've run into this problem in a lot of organizations that I've tried to either start or work with. And that's that, everybody's got good ideas, but where's the follow through, right? So using these Google Docs and online tools, we can assign, we can volunteer work. Let's not even assign it, right? Let's find out who wants to do what. And then we'll say, okay, by this date, we're going to have the product ready for you. And then we all come back together on a video conference, and each team that's been working on something can share out their work. When you don't get the work done, it's that peer pressure of, well, I'm showing up to the meeting with nothing in my hands. So if we do it right, I think we can create a collaborative environment where we are not in the same space, but we are working on the same projects online and digitally. I think we can push things forward faster doing that, and I think we can come up with better plans that have more input from the people on the ground and in the areas where these plans are going to affect. So let's talk about mass movements. We're facing a government that's almost completely controlled by the Republicans, and we have to counterbalance that. And the traditional American way of doing that is with a mass movement. Mass movements that push mass traction economic demands. And I think that we need to spend the next several months focusing on bringing younger people into the party and getting them involved in the process so that when push comes to shove, we have the numbers that can actually make a difference. We have the ideas that can make a difference, and then we can engage in that fight and win it. So let's talk about some of the issues that would be at the core of a mass movement today. First off, I think, is student loan debt, and second is the fight for 15. Let's start with student loan debt. Right now, there's millions of Americans who have gone to school and either graduated or not, but they're coming out with tens of thousands, if not $100,000 in student loan debt. And that's crushing an entire generation. We're not buying houses and cars, we're not starting businesses, we're not getting married and having kids like we would like to because we're putting so much money towards paying back our student loans. So let's bring back Elizabeth Warren's demand that the Federal Reserve refinance student loan debt at 0% interest. If we can open that door and get our foot into the Fed to refinance student loans, we can not only help people lower their payments and save them a lot of money in interest, but getting your foot into the door at the Federal Reserve opens up opportunities for economic rebuilding that would not be possible without it. And we're going to talk more about that later. The next demand is the 1% Wall Street sales tax to make college free. Just a couple generations ago, we were having the same argument about high school, right? Should high school be part of the mandatory and publicly paid for education system? And the answer was yes, and the country benefited from it. And then we had World War II and the GIs coming home with the GI Bill. They went to college, and that was revolutionary. So let's talk about a Wall Street sales tax. The image that Wall Street would like you to have of what they do is, the guys in the jackets, and they're on the floor, the trading floor, and they're shaking those slips of paper shouting buy and sell, and that there are investors who are doing their research and they find a company they like and they invest in it, and the company succeeds and they eventually, will make money off that. That's not how it works anymore. Today, if you're making money on Wall Street, you're doing it by trading thousands of shares per second, waiting for just the smallest fraction of a change in the price, and you sell it, right? And it's speculation, it's parasitism, it doesn't provide anything useful, it just rakes in money for Wall Street. Now, why are we going to let them do that? And the answer is, we're not. You stop that with a 1% sales tax on everything that Wall Street does. So whether they're selling stocks, bonds, derivatives, anytime that they're buying and selling, we put a 1% sales tax on that. What that does is it takes away that margin that the high frequency trading works off of. So it will eventually stabilize the markets, but it also creates a source of funding for things like free college, for splitting up among the states to help with medical programs or rebuilding infrastructure or education. We can demand that Wall Street pay its fair share, and we can use that money to do things like free college at the local or state level. Fight for 15. I think this is going to be a big one in Texas over the next year. In May, we have city council elections in several big cities across the state. If you look at the map, you're going to see the Dallas-Fort Worth area has a bunch of races. San Antonio has one, El Paso has one, but then there's also some races in areas that are near Texas, like Albuquerque, Colorado Springs, Aurora, which is in Denver, and then I think Wichita and Oklahoma City. We should reach out to all of them and create a Fight for 15 coordinated campaign for the city council. In my first video, I introduced Rick Trevino, who is running as a progressive for the city council in San Antonio, and his big thing is the living wage. And so I'm going to work on talking to Rick, and we'll bring him on and we can have him talk to you about his plans and what he's going to be doing. We can bring in a whole generation of people into the progressive cause with refinancing student loan debt, free college demands, and the Fight for 15 in these city council races coming up. So let's talk about what a 21st century progressive economy would look like in Texas. That would include renewable energy, rebuilding our infrastructure and putting people back to work, and a major commitment to space. Now, how do all these things fit together? Well, let's start with water. Okay? We have seen how big cities and places like Flint, Michigan have old and decrepit water systems that are providing polluted water to people. That's a problem that we have to fix. Second, we've seen how fracking has destroyed rural groundwater, and now people are able to light their sinks on fire using the water coming up from their wells. We have to replace that water for them, because to me, water is a human right, and clean water is a demand that we have to fight for. We need to have clean water as a demand because the solutions for that open up the door for renewable energy, rebuilding infrastructure, and permanent colonization of space. So that seems like a lot. How are we going to do that? And the answer is thorium energy. If you haven't heard of thorium, then that's definitely something you need to research. So in the video description below, I'm going to provide a link to a documentary called NASA Thorium Remix 2016, which is going to walk you through all the stages of thorium energy and the research that's been done and where we could take it. Now, I know that some of you may be skeptical on nuclear energy, so I'm also going to provide a link to a documentary called Pandora's Promise. And that's a documentary that was done by an anti-nuclear activist who did some research and his mind started changing. And then he put together this movie to help people move through the issue of the morality of nuclear power. So I'd ask you to keep an open mind on that. Watch the documentaries this weekend and find some time to think about it, because we can put together a picture of what Texas could be. Imagine Texas being the home of a 21st century nuclear industry that's clean, that's safe, that actively participates in cleaning up the waste from the old and dirtier kind of nuclear industry. What could we do with that? We can provide Texas cities with clean power. We could provide desalinated seawater up to places like San Antonio that's going to double in population in the next few decades. We could even go so far as to provide irrigation and agricultural water for ranches and farms. We could take the water all the way up to Albuquerque, up to Denver, places that need water. Texas could be the place that provides clean power and clean water for a major part of the country. But it doesn't stop there. We could take these reactors and sell them overseas. So places that are overcrowded and don't have modern electric, water, sewage systems. We can be the base that pushes all that forward, and we can raise the standard of living for millions of people. So what we're calling for is a joint research program between the University of Texas, Texas A&M, and NASA to develop a liquid fluoride thorium reactor. We in Texas already have a lot of advantages compared to the rest of the country and even the rest of the world in this. The University of Texas is running a research reactor that's very similar to this in Odessa, Texas. And Texas A&M has one of the largest nuclear engineering programs in the country. So we're already way ahead. And we have the Johnson Space Center. So these three institutions could work together to develop a reactor that could be used on Earth to provide carbon-free energy, and that could be used in space to power spaceships that can get to places like Mars or Jupiter or even beyond, and that could power permanent settlements and colonies on the Moon and Mars. And that's vital, because if you look at the history of NASA and the things that it has done, it's not just that we've gone out and landed on the Moon, that we've explored Jupiter and Saturn, or that we've sent a probe to Pluto. There are spin-offs that affect your everyday life that directly result from the research that NASA does. When you challenge yourself to operate in an environment like space, where there is zero error, where there is zero margin for error, you end up with solutions that are more creative, more energy efficient, and that will be applicable here on Earth that you never would have gotten if we had stayed here. What is this going to do for us? Well, on Earth, it will open up the door for renewable energy that is carbon-free, that can be mass-produced in factories here in Texas, providing good jobs, and that can be sold around the country and around the world. But the first thing they're going to ask is, how are you going to pay for it? We talked earlier about using the Federal Reserve to refinance student loan debt at 0% interest. That's an investment in the American people. We can also demand that the Federal Reserve invest in America itself, in our infrastructure. If they can loan trillions of dollars to the big banks to keep them from collapsing, then they can loan $5 trillion to the people of the United States to rebuild our infrastructure. So we have to talk about some worst case scenarios. One is war, and two is the rise of fascism in the United States. Let's talk about war first. The place that I start with war is get active or get radioactive. We live in a world that could be incinerated in a matter of minutes. And we have to make sure that we understand and have a foundation of what we want and don't want in regards to conflict overseas. And with the Trump presidency, it calls it all into question. What is he going to do? How can you push his buttons? You know, could he start a war? Or is it going to be a situation like when Nixon was on his way out and the people around him gave orders saying, you know what, if he tries to start a war or drop a bomb or something, don't do it. He's on his way out. We have to, protect the situation. So what is it going to be like? So a couple things that we know right now. One, we do not want a no-fly zone in Syria, because that means a coordinated bombing campaign of all the Syrian air assets. And if you're going to do that, you run the risk of killing Russians, which runs the risk of us being involved in a much wider war or even a nuclear war. That has to be avoided at all costs. Second, what is Trump going to do in regards to war? If some third world, dictator tweets a mean tweet at him, is he going to try to start a war? Well, the answer to that is that we have to put a movement together that will demand that Congress pass a declaration of war before any military action takes place. So if we can push these issues into the Congress, even if the Republicans start another disastrous war, at least we'll slow it down a little bit and put them on the record. Because then in 2018 and 2020, we can come back and say, look, we are the party of diplomatic solutions and peace. We are the party of rebuilding, not destroying. And I think that's going to be very resonant with the American people especially after this long war in Iraq and the still war in Afghanistan and Libya and Syria. It goes on and on. Now's the time to stop that. The other one is the rise of fascism in the United States. When you hear that word coming from the Texas Progressive Caucus, it's not, just an off-the-cuff remark that, we're using just to emphasize a point. We are going to study the historical process of how fascism arises in democratic countries and what we can do to stop it. And I'm going to tell you right now, one of the big things that we can do is a New Deal and FDR-style jobs program. Because there was a danger of fascism arising in the United States back in the 30s, and it's come back today, and we can use the solutions from then to fix our problems now. The other thing that we can do is be very prepared across Texas to identify fascist activity and meet it with nonviolent resistance. So we need to be prepared to respond nonviolently to right-wing groups that are using violence to break up protests, violence to intimidate political opponents, beating people up in the streets. All that kind of stuff needs to be met with strong condemnation and nonviolence resistance. And this is going to be a very interesting thing to do. We need to go to the city councils and to police chiefs and to mayors across the state, and we need to say, what are you going to do if there are groups that are using violence for political purposes in your city, in your county, in your state? How are you going to respond to that? Because I believe that the American institutions, whether they're at the city council level, at the state level, or at the national level, have built into them checks and balances that can check the rise of fascism. But it's our job to make sure that we demand the people in power actually respond to the issue appropriately. If there is violence caused by one side, the police and the FBI and law enforcement agencies need to be investigating that and need to stop that. It doesn't matter what their personal ideological bent is. They have a responsibility for keeping the peace inside the United States, and that's something that we're going to demand. So, I know that's a lot to throw at you in one video, but I want to reach out to you and say, I think that we are ready for this challenge. We can build the mass movement. We can educate people. We can get them involved in a way that is progressive and will push Texas forward. We can meet the challenges of war and fascism head on. We can involve people with student loan debt in the fight for 15, and we can rebuild this state and make it a world leader in energy and water production. I have great hopes for the future, and I'm ready for this fight, and I hope you'll join me. So this is Josh Greene signing off for the Texas Progressive Caucus with Organizing Update number 1.